It goes in eternity.
Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all!
See how the trouble you've started?
Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it.
Right! You tell them I'm coming! And hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio!
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Did you ever feel that things were not quite right? That everything was just ever so slightly askew?
Do you have, to paraphrase Morpheus, a splinter in your mind?
If you're interested in hearing the latest information about UFOs, the paranormal,
ancient cultures and structures,
monatomic elements,
longevity,
fantastic discoveries in science,
downloaded to your brain,
then tune into us. Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Mackie.
And we are Shiny Side Out, Sundays 2 to 4 a.m. Eastern. See you then.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here. Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talk Now Radio, listener-supported radio, where no topic is taboo, and your support helps keep it that way. And we're brought to you by Revolution Radio, listener-supported radio, where information never sleeps. Pardon my little hesitation there, folks. I could have sworn I heard myself coming through my headphones for a minute, and it kind of distracted me. But coming back to the business at hand, today I'm going to be interviewing Mark Gibbs, and we're going to be talking about his book, Final Deception. And before we're going to go into that, I'm going to give him a chance to tell you a little something about himself and, what got him on this particular topic. It's a very extremely in-depth book. I read it myself, very interesting. He covers a lot of information the average writers on ancient mysteries and end-time prophecies and some of the other genres don't touch on, and he goes in great detail with it, so you might want to look into this. I think you'll find it very interesting. So, Mark, how you doing today?
Hi, Royce. I'm doing fine here.
Is it as wet over there as it is here?
Good morning from Bali.
Sir?
Good morning from Bali.
Ah, okay, yeah. And good morning from Houston, where it's wet and soaking wet. Y'all got a lot of rain over there, too?
Not at the moment, no. It's been pretty dry here.
Okay. Well, real quick, like everybody, let me also let you know that if I disappear or me and my guests disappear, it probably would mean a power outage. We do have it raining all day long here. So far, we haven't had one today, so I'm hoping we won't, but I just wanted to prepare y'all just in case. So, Mark, why don't you tell us a little something about yourself and what it was that drew you to write about this particular topic?
Well, this is actually the third book in a trilogy that I started, I would say about 2005, and with a kind of biblical theme. But by way of education, I studied computer science in the UK. That was in the early 80s, and then I moved to the States in 89, and I ended up doing a postgraduate degree at a theological seminary. It was a religious education, which isn't strictly Christianity or Judeo-Christianity. It takes in every religion, plus even New Age religions and that kind of thing. So I came out of that around about 97, and I ended up in Bali. I visited Bali, fell in love with the island, married a Balinese girl, and I've been here lived here since 99. And around about 2005, I just got an itch to start writing about some of the things I'd studied for my master's thesis in the States, and because the master's thesis was kind of heavily censored, as they often need to be to get a passing grade or to even be accepted as a viable thesis. Many things are strictly off limits and taboo despite what you might hear about freedom of education. Many things are off limits in higher education. And my particular interest was in the virgin birth and, who the real father may have been. And I dug up a lot of interesting information on that.
Yeah, so I've always had trouble buying that the way the Bible put it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, you and just about everybody else, really. But anyway, I tried to do the impossible, really, which was to find out who the biological father was. So I wrote a book about that called The Virgin and the Priest. I didn't crack the mystery, but I just laid out a lot of options. And that book didn't really do so well. It did well in German. It was translated into German. I did okay there. So I made a follow-up, which came out, I think, early 2008, called Secrets of the Holy Family. And in that one, I looked into broad issues connected with the so-called Holy Family of Mary, Joseph, Jesus, Elizabeth, Zacharias, and John the Baptist. And I brought Mary Magdalene into it. And I kind of thought I'd said everything I needed to say. And I think it was around about middle of 2012. I was having dinner with somebody who is really what you might call a theoretical metaphysicist. It was a very intriguing lady from Florida, and she inspired me to write a third book and to tie up a lot of the loose ends from the previous two. And that's what the Final Deception is. It's a culmination of the whole project, and it includes some information from the earlier books.
I see. So this is the final. This is the final book on the trilogy, then. Yeah,
and I don't really wish to go back to this. Strictly speaking, to the birth scenario again. You know, I've really done that one to death. If you thought that there's a lot of details in the Final Deception, you should see the other two.
Yeah. Now, I want to remind everybody, if y'all would like to call in and ask questions, the number is 347-688-2902. And you can also log in through the server on the Skype, Revolution Radio Studio A, if you have access to it. And I can pick you up that way and just bring you into the conversation. So, coming back to the book at hand, actually one of the first questions I thought about while I was reading this that I wanted to ask you about is about the names of the pharaohs, because that's something that has bothered me for years. Is it mentions the names of kings of almost every surrounding country except for Egypt, and then you don't see an Egyptian pharaoh named anywhere that I know of in the Bible that I can think of. I've been able to find, and I'm like, why? This seems, exclusive. In other words, I mean, why does it mention other kings and not the pharaohs by name? In other words, so I got to thinking that perhaps if people knew the name of the pharaoh of the Exodus, then they would also be able to identify who it was that was exiting out of Egypt at the time, if it wasn't the Israelites. In other words, do you think I'm very far off base on that one?
No, you're not. You're not off base at all. If you're writing a history, the first thing you're concerned with is getting the names and the dates correct, isn't it?
Right.
That's the first thing. Now, that's the last thing that Genesis history or Bible, Old Testament history as a whole is concerned with. And, we're talking the story of the Exodus, but really the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, it's basically, they cannot be dated. None of the events that take place can be dated. Now that can only be by design. But that can only be that. Now, why would you wish to write a history which couldn't be determined? You must be trying to conceal something.
That's my thought exactly, especially when you read other parts of the Bible and it talks about so-and-so was doing this in the 3rd year of the reign of so-and-so. I mean, it's given the kind of details you're talking about. It's given the names of the person who's reigning. It's given the time that it was done in and everything. So you can't miss it. When it comes to Egypt, all of a sudden, everybody's hush-hush, like you say.
Well, obviously, they knew who the pharaohs were. I mean, in particular, the pharaoh that's involved with the Exodus story. Obviously, they knew who that was. And as you say, if they specify his name, then everybody knows exactly who the Israelites are and what this actual story refers to. And that obviously was embarrassing information.
I would think so, but the question is, why would it be embarrassing? Why would they be wanting to hide their true identity, or why would they be traveling incognito?
Well, if the true identity of the Israelites was known, nobody would buy the idea that they were God's chosen people.
They must have had some kind of a bad reputation about them.
Exactly.
So
that's enough said, basically.
Okay. Now, what we haven't gotten we beat around the bush about, we haven't got down to, is that we're referring to the Hyksos tribe and them being Israelites. I mention this here because my next question involves mentioning the Hyksos. You were mentioning that in your book that the Hyksos defy classification, and you covered this answer in your book, but I wanted to cover it live on the air for the sake of the listeners. But, the same can be said for the Sumerians themselves, couldn't it, that they also defied classification? Otherwise, they just come up out of nowhere and nobody knew who they were, where they came from.
Yeah. Well, the Hyksos are a Sumerian branch. We can't say for sure, still we cannot say for sure what ethnicity the ancient Sumerians were. We don't know that, but we do know that they were not Semites. They were not a Semitic people. And Genesis explains that Abraham came from Shinar, which is the word for Sumer, Shinar. So Abraham, there's no reason to think that Abraham was a Semitic. Absolutely no reason whatsoever. He's often considered...
no reason except for the genealogies that the Bible puts in there, but then genealogies could have been tempered with.
Well, yeah, the idea of that Semitic comes from Shem. I guess that's what you're referring to. Semitic people are descended from Shem, one of Noah's 3 sons. That's a quaint notion, but even in fundamentalist theological schools, they don't quite interpret it as literally as that. Modern linguists define Semitic people, as by their language, by the roots of their language. So in modern terms, that's obviously the Middle East. It doesn't you wouldn't call Iraqis and Iranians Semitic people.
Well, after I read, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
So it's important to. It's obvious. It's glossed over a lot, but it's important to for people to understand that and it was Sitchin who really brought this out into the mainstream 30, 40 years ago, that Abraham was a Sumerian, was from Sumer. His father was a priest. It's a hereditary priesthood. So Abraham himself was brought up as a priest, the Sumerian priest. Now that's not Hebrew, that's not Semitic. And he came out of Sumer with an army.
Now, and the Bible does tell us this here. Ur was a Sumerian area, and so was Nineveh and some of the others. Now, I was going to mention to you, though, that I was got interested in the Table of Nations while I was reading your book. And one of the things that kind of struck me as odd, and I don't know if you've noticed this before or not, is Ashur. He was supposed to be descended from the children of Eber, I think it was, somewhere down the line. But before he's even mentioned in his genealogical record, further down in chapter 10, he's mentioned way up high there as coming out of Shinar to build Nineveh. Well, that would actually place at least one of Abraham's ancestors as being a Sumerian himself if he built Nineveh in the land of Shinar, wouldn't it? Yeah. I mean, strictly from Genesis record, which is hardly, it's hardly
pure historical fact. But even from the few snippets that are in there, the only logical conclusion can be drawn is that Abraham was quite a high-ranking, an extremely high-ranking Sumerian nobility.
Right.
This isn't some kind of man on the street. It's not the Joe Sixpack of ancient Sumer. This is the George Bush of ancient Sumer, if you get my drift.
Right. So they were really Sumerians or Hyksos, and they were actually trying to, I guess, in a sense, hijack the Shemitic bloodline or reputation to try to claim it as their own, make it appear that they were this other tribe than what they really were for some kind of a reason?
Well, when Sumer collapsed around about 2000 BC, which most historians would agree, the historians that recognize Abraham as a historical person considered that he must have left Sumer around about that time. Right? So they didn't, they set out, Abraham's branch of the Sumerians traveled west. Now, I'm not saying that they left Sumer in order to turn themselves into Hebrews or something like that. They just simply escaped, the devastation that happened in Sumer. I mean, there was a lot of weird stuff going on that time. The Sodom and Gomorrah is just an example. Now, Zachariah Sitchin and a lot of scholars think there was nuclear explosions going on at that time. So there's some kind of, high-tech warfare going on at that time. So there's good reasons to get out of that area. All right? Now, God, according to the Genesis, God or the Elohim, which strictly speaking is the gods with a small g, contacted Abraham, and everybody knows the story. They told him he would be a father of many nations, and da-da-da-da-da. But nonetheless, we can just say that he was at this time we can say he was simply a Sumerian prince who got out of Sumer with an army and was looking for a place to go.
Right. Trying to kind of like reestablish themselves, so to speak.
They're looking for, and that obviously means, fighting somebody and taking some land.
That's pretty much the straightforward way of conquest. However, I think history kind of shows they weren't always straightforward in their conquest. They conquested, but it wasn't always straightforward. But Abraham went all over the place, and he was meeting with pharaohs and kings. I mean, he had a lot of clout. Yeah, let's say they wouldn't give him an audience if he didn't. Had to have a lot more clout than what the Bible gave him credit for, just to get an audience with a ruling class. So
I mean,
go ahead.
This notion that we have, and you can see it on the religious paintings and iconography of an elderly man in white robes and a stick, trudging over the hills and valleys with his sheep and his camels, his wife, and his small entourage of saintly followers, is absurd.
One of the things I was going to also mention to you is in the book you're describing the way the Hyksos rules, and you kind of compared it to the Saxons and some of the other rulers. Weren't the Saxons actually the sons of Isaac?
Well, that's a theory. There's many theories, to do with the lost tribes of Israel and all this kind of thing. I don't really want to go down that road.
That would be kind of theoretical, but I kind of suspect that they really were, and that would explain why they had the similar kind of rule. But that again is speculation. Now, another thing that you mentioned in your book was that Moses and Osiris, and I might be pronouncing that wrong, end up being the same entity. Now, I've done some study that's indicated they thought Osiris was Joseph, but as we both know, those are two entirely different time frames. Do you suppose it's more likely that, that maybe there was more than one Osiris in Egypt?
Well, that's possible. I don't draw any firm conclusions on that Osiris reference, which comes from Manitou. I don't really know whether, and I don't think it's important, really. The point is, I mean, most listeners have probably never even heard of the Hyksos.
I would agree with that.
This also is not accidental. And I did 4 years in a prestigious East Coast theological institute, and the Hyksos were never mentioned, not once, in any biblical class or Testament studies, Hebrew studies, never even mentioned, which is phenomenal, because the historical record shows that Egypt had 6 foreign non-Egyptian pharaohs from approximately 1700 BC to 1550 BC. 6 foreign pharaohs, in other words, non-Egyptian pharaohs, and this is the traditional period of the Exodus. Although in the last 100-200 years, most scholars are dating the Exodus to be mid-13th century BC, although no evidence exists to support that. But that is the most common understanding for the date of the Exodus.
Right. And also there's some kind of a, thing going on that one party will tell you that there's been no mention of an Exodus in Egyptian records whatsoever. However, while that's been claimed by many scholars, you mentioned in your book, and I've seen this here on the internet before, a papyrus called the Ipuwer papyrus, which describes the events happening in Egypt, the plagues, almost exactly like the Exodus account describes them. In other words,
yeah, it does. And this also is not something known at all by even by Christians, by lay people, churchgoers. Your average churchgoer may believe in the story of the plagues. He might believe that, but he won't know that it's actually corroborated by historical documents, which is amazing. And even pastors and professors at divinity schools, they may have heard of the Ipuwer papyrus, but they don't talk about it. There's just a few. It's mentioned on websites and in 1 or 2 obscure scholarly books. But this is an ancient document from about 3,500 years old, which describes pretty much exactly what the book of Exodus describes.
Well, does the document date back anywhere near to the time of the Exodus?
Yeah, well, most historians, the document now we've got seems to have been written about 1200 BC. But it's acknowledged on the document that it is a copy of an earlier original.
Okay.
And most scholars date that to about 1500 BC. So there's quite a few historians believe it's connected with the Hyksos. In other words, the events described in the Ipuwer papyrus are events that took place during the Hyksos control of Egypt.
Well, no wonder it's such a rare document. Somebody probably didn't want that document found somewhere down the line.
Yeah, and since it has been found, then they basically cover it up.
Now, not only do we have the papyrus that describes that kind of expulsion and everything going on, and it was dated back to a similar time as the Hyksos, but also we got the housing here. I was reading in your book, you mentioned that the Israelite four-room house and the ones found at Avaris belonging to the Hyksos. Now, these houses were supposed to be unique to the Israelites. However, the Hyksos were building the same kind of houses. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And it shouldn't really be a surprise, because as a reader of the book would discover, the Hyksos and the Israelites are one and the same. So therefore, they built the same kind of buildings and lived in the same kind of homes.
And they were
the Hyksos capital, which has only been excavated since the late 60s. It's in the Nile Delta, the region of Goshen. It's known in the Bible, it calls it Goshen, where the Israelites settled. That's where the Hyksos capital is, where the pharaohs ruled Egypt from. And I think it was a Germanic and Austrian team have been there since 68. They're still there. They're still excavating. And they've uncovered numerous Israelite houses. The Israelite house is a specific design that is unique to the Israelites, the ancient Israelites. I want to stress here that when we talk about Israelites, it's really got nothing to do with the modern Israelis. There's a connection, of course, there's a connection. But this is a different people, in essence.
Would that be the Canaanites?
No. Well, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. You want me to talk more about the Israelite name
why don't we do that first before you let me jump ahead?
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. I sometimes get ahead of myself.
Well, the name is in Genesis. There's the classic story of Jacob wrestling with an angel, and then this angel supposedly gives him the name Israel as a result of Jacob, winning his contest with the angel. Now we're told that Israel means he who struggles, or he who is victorious with God. That's a classic translation of the word, but that's not clear that it means that. I mean, the Phoenicians believed Israel was the name of Saturn, and that's a whole new subject.
Oh, I mean to tell you, it's a whole new subject, especially if you look at their feast days.
Yeah, but anyway, the point is, what the Bible's telling us, that whoever these people are, the chosen people, at some point their name changed. At some point their name changed into Israelites. Now, in the historical record, the name Jacob shows up quite a lot in Egypt. And the Hyksos, of course, are in the historical record, but the Israelites are not. And the earliest mention of Israelites is found on a stone pillar, which dates to about 1200 BC, which is one of the reasons, and that's not even found in Egypt. That's found in Canaan. There's no reference to Israelites in Egypt at all. Period. So because this first earliest reference to Israelites is dated at 1200, historians tend to think that the Exodus must have taken place shortly before 1200. That's the logic on that. Now, most of the Israelite houses that are found in Israel today are always dated from post 1200, either 1200 BC or post 1200. But you can't date stone. You can't carbon date stone. So these dates are just guesses. It's not that much different from dating the pyramid to 2500 BC. It's just pure guesswork, and very expedient guesswork at that. So it does. If we accept the premise that the people in the Bible were actually in Genesis, were actually in Egypt, then their name must have changed at some point. If the Israelites were in Egypt, their name must have changed because they're not they're not mentioned in any Egyptian records, and the Egyptian chronologies of that period are very detailed. So their name changed.
What do we have?
And I'm saying that the Hyksos, the historical people known as the Hyksos, were in fact the Israelites, and they changed their name basically because they had to. They had to. Now, and these people went to Canaan. This is a long time ago. And they from Canaan they went to many places, and they did many, many things. But they left. Of course, they left a root there. Now, modern Israel is geographically it's in the same location, but the modern Israelis, very few of them would be descendants from the Hyksos. I mean, in terms of percentage, maybe less than 10%.
That's what I've read.
Yeah, Israel was invaded many times, and they were enslaved many times, and this is over a period of 3,000 years. And there's many different factions developed within Judaism and within the ancient Israelites, such as the Pharisees and the Sadducees, whose origins are completely unknown, and they have no historical record of their origins at all. And so many different groups came into that area and took root. So it's a real mixed bag.
Hard to identify anybody.
Yeah.
But going back to Egypt for just one moment, are there any records in Egypt of a Hyksos being named Jacob? I know there was records of Jacob, but can you link Hyksos and Jacob together in Egyptian records?
Yes, one of the Hyksos pharaohs was called Jacob, and anyone can look that up. Now, of course, these pharaohs, and this was true of most kings of the ancient world, they have several names. They had several names. So if you look up a list of Hyksos kings, sometimes it won't give the name Jacob. But if the actual historical document that lists the Hyksos kings it's called the Turin papyrus, because it's kept in a museum in Turin, Italy. That mentions Jacob. That the sixth and last Hyksos king, his name is Jacob. Now, isn't that something?
Yeah, I would think, though, if it was amongst the ones that were exiting, that he probably was not the same Jacob that was Joseph's father. He was probably a descendant.
Oh, yeah, well, that's a common name. That's a common name, and of course, in those days, a name was as much a title as anything else.
Okay.
Hyksos leaders would Jacob would be a title for them, but they whatever their name was, once they became the leader, they could well be just known as Jacob.
Oh, that was interesting information I never knew before. But what they say, you're supposed to live and learn.
Well, you mentioned the Saxons. Well,
yes.
The Vikings, there's a theory out there that the Vikings are themselves direct descendants of the Hyksos, and the VI, is actually the Roman. Is Roman. It's the Roman numeral for 6, and the Viking people is supposedly they're descended from the 6th king, the 6th kings, the 6 kings which were the 6 Hyksos kings of, or 6 Hyksos pharaohs of Egypt.
I never realized that. That was news. Of course, there was another thing in your book that was news to me, and if I'm not jumping too far ahead again, but you mentioned a Dr. Neiman, who was one of the leaders of the Australian archaeological team, was excavating the ruins of Avaris. Yeah. And he has a book out, according to you. Well, actually, that is getting ahead of myself. Before that, he was explaining that the Egyptian locals traditionally knew the area as of Avaris as Tel Judea, which means the Jewish ruins. You got any idea how the mainstream scholars just explain this here away? I mean, that Avaris would be known to them under a Jewish name or as a Jewish ruin. I mean, surely mainstream science or the scholars have to explain that somehow, don't they?
Well, you would think, but it's too. This entire this entire story is, and I'm talking now about the Exodus and the Israelites being slaved in Egypt and the story of Moses. That's the foundation of Western civilization and culture, or one of the major building blocks of Western culture. And you can't, this isn't something you can just, a scholar's not going to stand up and blow it away. They're not just like that. They're not going to, he's not going to keep his job, basically. I found that out when I was at theological school. There are certain limits to where you can go, what you can say on the record. Once they've entrusted you with a tenureship or a PhD, they expect you to toe the line to a certain degree, and you're not going to. For instance, there was a scholar, you might not remember the name, Jane Scherberg, a Catholic scholar, who wrote a book on the virgin birth, where she suggested that Jesus did actually have a biological father. Now, of course, to a Protestant, that's not really an important issue. But her car was burnt. She was kicked out of her job, and her life was ruined, and that was in the mid-90s, not that long ago. That gives you some idea. So if you're a reputable scholar, you're not going to go on TV and say that the ancient Israelites were the Hyksos, a raider race from Sumer. They worshipped the Annunaki god. I mean, you can dance around, but you can't definitively state that and expect to keep your job and keep your peers on your side.
And you have to be careful just exactly how close you dance to the flame.
Yeah, you have to leave the system like Zecharia Sitchin did. He got out of the system, and then he wrote his books. And my beef with Sitchin's books is only that I don't dispute his discoveries at all and his findings. I dispute his conclusions.
Right.
I dispute his conclusions.
Well, that's pretty common.
And he doesn't identify the Israelites as the Hyksos, which is quite a strange omission. He doesn't really comment on the Hyksos. He just mentions them in passing.
Well, the thought
it's very important.
Do what now?
It's very important to identify them, the Israelites as the Hyksos, because once that's clear, then everything else slowly fits into place.
Now, I was going to say, before we leave the Hyksos in Egypt, we might want to also bring up the fact that the Egyptians also knew the Hyksos as shepherd kings, which is a very important, to your case, because your very first chapter deals with the shepherd kings and the connection to the Sumerians, to the connection, to the shepherd kings. So I thought now might be a good time for you to talk a little bit about that.
Yes. Well, the idea that the shepherd kings, which were the Hyksos pharaohs of Egypt, are one and the same with the shepherds of the Old Testament. And let's not forget, just about every single Israelite hero, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the shepherd boy king David, they're all shepherds. They're all shepherds. If you look at what they did, it's absurd to imagine Abraham as a pastoral farmer who traveled around the Middle East, bumping into kings and pharaohs.
And by the way, his flock of sheep with him in the Bible that I can remember.
Yeah, and David, the wonder boy, who just happened to be a shepherd in his spare time. But a book came out in I think it was 1998 by Ralph Ellis, a British scholar, and this book was called Jesus, Last of the Pharaohs, and it's quite an interesting read. About I would take issue with certain parts of it, but he was the first writer to bring up this point, put it out there into the public arena. That book was moderately successful in the UK. I don't think it did much in America, but he really went to town on this point. Now, I read the book at the time it came out, and I just I agreed with the premise, but I presented different evidence to Ralph, and his explanation for the term shepherd is to do with the zodiac, Aries. He claimed that it was because the events took place during the so-called epoch of Aries that they called themselves shepherds. If you follow my drift, the Aries would be the era in history from about 2000 BC to 10 AD.
If I remember correctly, Zechariah Sitchin actually talked about how different Anunnaki gods ruled during different aeons or different ages. Like the first one was Anu, I think, was the bull that ruled in Taurus. Then you had another one for Aries, and I think Jesus was ruling during Pisces. And when we come into Aquarium, it's supposed to be a different one. But these gods were each claiming rulership during these time frames, if I remember correctly.
Well, I don't recall Sitchin going into too much detail about that. But the idea, we're coming up to the age of Aquarius. We're leaving the age of Pisces, and because early Christians Jesus called them fishermen, and they use the sign of the fish. They put it on the back of the cars, right? But I'm a Christian. This has been out there a long time, this idea. And what some people think is that the shepherd kings were so designated because they lived during the period of Aries, when the Aries is in the ascendant. I'm saying that's not so. I'm saying that's total irrelevance, a red herring. I got nothing to do with it.
Okay.
Because Jesus might have called his followers fishermen, but he was the good shepherd. He wasn't the big fish, really. He was the good shepherd, right? They still build churches today dedicated to the good shepherd. But the period of Aries is long gone. And before Aries was supposedly the period of Taurus. But there was plenty of shepherd divinities and shepherd gods during that period, and even before. So the shepherd icon, the shepherd motif, is not limited to 2000 BC to 0 AD. It's been going around a long, long time. And I state in the book, this comes from, it's a very cynical term, actually. It comes from the Sumerian word lulu. Lulu, L-U-L-U. And the lu is a sheep. And the Sumerians made a lulu, which is translated today as man. According to their text, they made lulus, which is why Sitchin says that the Sumerians, the Annunaki made humans. And lulu is a play on words. It means men and sheep. And they considered themselves our shepherds, if you like, or their mediators, which would be the kings of Sumer, were the shepherds, and the sheep were their subjects. You get the drift?
Yeah, I do kind of get the drift. But that's making me wonder is, would this race of Lulu be a separate race from the other races?
Oh, no, the Lulu have nothing to do. What I'm saying in the book is the Lulu have got nothing to do with humans. The humans have got nothing to do with Lulu.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So, in other words, the Anunnaki gods did not make humans at all. That's absurd. They might want humans to think that, but that's another issue, isn't it?
Well, what's actually theorized is that they upgraded us from half man, half human, half beast. But you're saying that they didn't even do that much. So you're saying man was already a creation here.
Yeah, man. The existence of humans on Earth predates the Anunnaki landing here. Nothing in the Bible, absolutely nothing in the Bible states that humans did not predate Adam.
I would agree with that. A lot of preachers miss that point, that actually Adam was told to replenish the earth, not fill it, but to replenish it, in other words, which means that it must have been filled up once before, in other words, before the flood, or before the void.
Well, Adam, according to Genesis, Adam's a long time before the flood. But most critical scholars of Genesis, consider that the creation of Adam's story is lifted from, or at least heavily influenced by, the earlier Mesopotamian, which Mesopotamia covers Sumer and Babylon, basically. It's their legends of the Anunnaki creation of the Lulu. So Adam, in a sense, is patterned on the Lulu, the creation of the Lulu.
But that was made up, it wasn't real.
No, there's no reason to think that. The Sumerian cuneiform texts explain in great detail how the Lulu was created. Now, when I say great detail, they're not mentioning this specific strand of DNA went here and this went there. What it does is explain that.
Okay. that would be break time music. Everybody hold tight. We'll come back and we'll finish this up after the break.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who are you? I am the architect. I created the Matrix. I've been waiting for you.
Why am I here?
You are the eventuality of an anomaly which, despite my sincerest efforts, I have been unable to eliminate from what is otherwise a harmony of mathematical precision, which has led you inexorably here.
You haven't answered my question.
The Matrix is older than you know. As you are undoubtedly gathering, the anomaly is systemic, creating fluctuations in even the most simplistic equation.
Choice. The problem is choice.
Right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. Be here Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for Private Eye Matrix Revealed with Monique Lassane.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent news story, and I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen.
Hey folks, Captain Nighthawk here. Do you have a favorite host? Well, imagine if you will having all the broadcast shows from 2013 to listen to anytime you want. Awesome deal, huh? Anyway, so stop by freedomslips.com and order the entire 2013 library of your favorite host for just $30. Not only do you help with the station funding to keep us on the air, you also help the host because they get half of the net on every order. Also, we have Revolution Radio's all-time favorite shows all on one disc. The details are really broad, so you'll have to visit the website and go look at the details yourself. It's, again, www.freedomslips.com/season2013.htm. And get your favorites. First come, first serve, 7 to 21 days for delivery. Thank you. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information never sleeps, including me. Later.
We've got to stop them! They're going to kill us all!
Join Revolution Radio every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Studio B for Momentary Zen with host Zen Garcia at freedomslips.com, the People Station.
He wants a challenge. Let's give him one.
The voice that whispers in your ears are the screams that you fear. The mind you cannot defy is the heart that rules mankind. The people who made you are the gods that will save you. I am Steve Travesty. I am the voice. The ghost in the machine. Ghost in the Machine. Tuesdays, 8 p.m. Studio A.
Right here, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Okay, everybody, we are back, and we can continue our conversation. Actually, I kind of forgot exactly where we left off, but I believe we were talking about the Lulu. I'm sorry for the interruption on that one there, Mark, but if you can remember where you were at with that, why don't you finish that thought?
Well, the Sumerian texts describe that the Annunaki came here in search of gold. That was one of the reasons for coming, was they needed gold for the atmosphere of their home planet. Apparently they have a part metallic biology, and it needed an infusion. Their atmosphere needed infusions of gold dust. Now, this business of excavating gold, mining gold, wasn't as high-tech, apparently as high-tech as we might imagine. In other words, the Annunaki rank and file who were tasked with getting the gold rebelled because of the harsh working conditions and the manual labor. This is according to the text. This is where, according to Sitchin and his supporters, come in, because they accept the premise that humans, Lulu, were made as a slave race to work in gold mines in the place of the Anunnaki. But what I'm saying in the book is that the Anunnaki needed a docile, pliant people. They needed a people with strong, robust musculature and frames, a people sturdy, stocky build with big hands. In other words, I'm saying they needed a Neanderthal. They did not need humans. Not only humans not as physically powerful as the Neanderthal, humans are not exactly what you call compliant. And the idea of that all the humans on the planet were gathered up into prehistoric FEMA camps and forced to work underground is silly, in my view. So, whereas biological evolutionists can't explain the sudden appearance of Neanderthal in the fossil record, the Sumerian texts do. And they explain that it's a genetically engineered mix. Now, they don't go into great details of, what elements are in this mix. But there's no reason at all to imagine that the Lulu slave race were humans.
Okay, well, so now I understand what you were saying a little bit better. You weren't saying they didn't create them. You were saying they weren't human. I just misunderstood it. Okay, so the Lulus were Neanderthals then, but they're no longer with us. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Lulu is translated as man, as human. Right? That's the English translation of Lulu. But why? Why isn't Lulu translated as Neanderthal? Well, who knows why?
They may not have known the word Neanderthal back then.
Yeah, well, they didn't have the word human back then either. Not in Sumer.
Yeah, that's true.
As I point out in the book, Neanderthals are not human ancestors. Humans are not evolved from Neanderthals. That's a popular misconception, and very, very few evolutionists, scientists, will argue with that, because there's no Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA in human mitochondrial DNA, which is always passed down through the maternal line. So there's no, this needs to be nailed. This misconception needs to be nailed. Humans are not descendants of Neanderthals. Okay. Now, Cro-Magnon's a different matter. Cro-Magnons, we are part of our family. And I explain in the book that Cro-Magnon is an upgrade of the Neanderthal. Cro-Magnons evolved or developed to the point where they could interbreed with humans, pre-existing humans. And therein lies the root of our problems today. Therein lies the root of our problems for the last 50,000 years, at least. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I was just listening to you there. And I was also thinking that we've gotten halfway through the show, and one of the things we might want to mention on this here, because, there's some other areas we haven't covered, and I just had it on the tip of my tongue just a minute ago while I was listening to you, and now my brain went on it. Go ahead with where you at about the Cro-Magnons, and I'll see if it comes back to me while you're talking.
Well, the Cro-Magnons their DNA is in human DNA, and no one would argue that the humans, the Homo sapiens sapiens, which is what we are, no one would argue that we are not descended from Cro-Magnons. Well, no scientist would argue. Perhaps a creationalist or fundamentalist might argue against that. But from the genetic record, we are related to them. However, not all humans have Cro-Magnon genetic material. Not all. And how could it be then that we are related to them? Well, Cro-Magnons are not that much different from Neanderthals in terms of their robust nature. And what we do know about Cro-Magnons is they were not farmers. They were nomadic, and they traveled around a lot. They were the original hunter-gatherers and the original cave painters. So they were a little bit, a lot more sophisticated than the Neanderthals. And many scientists think that the Cro-Magnons wiped out the Neanderthals. Although that's not proven one way or the other. But it's a theory, because the Neanderthals suddenly disappeared. And anyone who knows anything about evolution theory is that everything changes are supposed to take place over aeons, over hundreds of thousands and millions of years. Yet the Neanderthal abruptly appear and then they abruptly disappear. The Cro-Magnons abruptly appear and they abruptly disappear. And the best solution to the disappearance of Cro-Magnon, since they could reproduce with humans, since they could interbreed with humans, they simply bred themselves out of existence.
They became human.
Which is a euphemistic way of saying they raped themselves out of existence.
Okay, now, I remembered what that question was, but before I go on to it, while we're still on Cro-Magnon, I heard you say something just a second ago about the Cro-Magnon being the first tillers of the ground, or the...
No, they were not farmers, the Cro-Magnon.
Oh, you said hunter-gatherers, didn't you?
Yeah, they were the...
I don't know where I got that from, because I was trying to think, who were the first shepherds? That would have been Abel's line, wouldn't it?
Well, there's Abel's a shepherd, but who is Abel? I mean, we can. I'm saying in the book that the Abel, Cain, and Seth,
right,
are Enki, Enlil, and Marduk.
I read that. I did read that. That's right.
And that in the Genesis, or the Torah, was compiled during the exile in Babylon, which of course the chief god of Babylon was Marduk. So the Genesis perspective on history of the history of the chosen people is that they are Sethian, that they are all descended from Seth,
which equate to Marduk,
which relates to Marduk. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that reminded me, though, I had another question on that. I had to ask that. I wanted to ask you about the interbreeding thing, because actually the shepherd kings and their descendants have, and to this day, are still interbreeding. Is that not correct?
What do you mean? What do you mean by shepherd kings to this day?
Well, I mean the descendants are the ones that were the shepherd kings. In other words, I mean we don't know them as shepherd kings nowadays, but I'm talking about in the original.
Well, we might not know them as shepherd kings, but
they still have the same bloodline, is what I'm saying.
They're still in positions of power,
right? But I mean,
the Hyksos, the Hyksos line or the Hyksos race is see what we haven't really explained is that the Cro-Magnons. What is a Cro-Magnon? A human, we can define a human as a physical body with a specific type of consciousness, which we'll call human, right? And so a Cro-Magnon, what is its consciousness? Well, it's not human. Otherwise, it would be human, wouldn't it? So I'm trying to say that the Cro-Magnon consciousness is Annunaki, which, as you would expect, if they were engineered by the Annunaki. Okay? This is very important because if a Cro-Magnon man rapes an Earth woman, what is the consciousness of the child? Now, if that consciousness is Annunaki, then you have a problem. You have a hybrid, and that looks human. Well, it would after several generations, but it's not actually human. Okay, so this is a serious point, because the shepherds are such. In other words, they're hybrids that are not. We do not have human consciousness, and take it upon themselves to take care of the sheep. Now, the shepherd kings. That's simply the ruling caste of these hybrids, non-human hybrids. Okay. So this is why they consider themselves a master race, separate from the rest of mankind. God's chosen, if you like. Now, when they came out of Egypt, and when they were in Egypt, they were in other places as well, and they went by different names, such as the Phoenicians. Okay. But when they came out, they went everywhere. And by studying and I get into this later in the book, by studying the iconography and the symbolism used by various groups at various times, you can trace their roots to the Hyksos. There was the Knights Templar, and I don't talk about the Freemasons much, but they would be the modern, they would be the Hyksos in today's world.
Okay, and what about the church? Would they trace back to any other group?
Well, you mean the Roman Catholic Church?
Yeah. Well, the Protestants ain't nothing but her kids, her daughters. So.
Well, you see, the early church was predominantly Hyksos controlled. I mention this in the book because. The Galilean Jesus, as I call him, was essentially on a Hyksos mission, and that was a Hyksos movement. But that was co-opted and hijacked by Rome. That's obviously the famous story with Constantine and the Council of Nicaea. That when Christianity as it was, or the church, was formally usurped and taken into the state apparatus of Rome. That Rome at that time was not the Hyksos run, Hyksos dominated, because, and this is, we might not have time to get into this now, but Hyksos were not the only game in town, not by a long shot. As the iconography shows, I talk about the dragon slayer motif,
right,
which is familiar to every single culture in the world.
And you got a whole chapter about that in your book, I notice.
Yeah, and so the dragon culture, the enemy, which is the enemy of the Hyksos, which would be best represented in its simplest form by Roman Catholicism. In today's world, it goes beyond Rome, of course, it goes beyond the church. But it's that basic dynamic is played out through history. I don't mention the word Illuminati in the book because that's a word that's bandied around so much, it's kind of lost any meaning. But in its truest sense, Illuminati is not some Bavarian secret society formulated in the late 18th century. Illuminati goes way, way back, pre-Atlantis times, and they do not consider themselves human. Okay, they consider themselves sons and daughters of the gods, with a small g, which is not unusual. I mean, the kings of England and France used to interpret themselves as the divine right of kings, right? You know, you have a direct lineage to God. Only it's gods with a small g, really, that we're talking about. In other words, they're hybrids. They're not human. But they're not. Of course, they're not all aware of that. But at the top echelons are quite aware and consider that a superior lineage to the rabble, the rank and file human.
Well, that's part of what I was getting around to, is if I'm understanding your book correctly, there's actually more than one lineage that's competing for who's going to rule the world. Is that a correct assessment, you'd say?
Well, yeah, but it's not simply a matter of they're not really competing for political power. It's much more profound than that. I don't really get into that in the book, but this is it's a cosmic struggle. Let's put it that way. It's a cosmic struggle that goes beyond politics here. But what the book's implying is that history, as it relates to wars, basically, which is really what history is, it's a list of wars and kings, is really not so much human history as their history, where it's competing non-human groups fighting here through their proxies here, and humans are dragged into it. But it's not really our fight. We're told that, humans are warlike beings, and that's our nature, is to fight and to conquer and to rule, blah, 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 blah. Well, I don't think so.
That's only what we come to believe.
Yeah, that's when we look at the history books, we end up coming to that conclusion. But the history books leave out the part about non-humans living in human bodies, right? They're not exactly going to say that.
You know, David Icke did a lot of study, and according to him, there is a group out there that's not human inside of a human body, that are reptilian, and that they can actually morph. Have you got any familiarity with that?
I am familiar with that. Well, the reptilian idea doesn't really negate what we're saying, what I'm saying in the book. I do address. If you remember, I go into the why are there so many of the gods portrayed as snakes or with snake legs?
Right.
So there's a reptilian element to the ancient deities. You know, we can say that,
or at least the one group of them.
Right. There's reptilian, and if the dragon form, which the dragons take many different shapes and sizes and forms, and they are very similar to giant serpents. So we can surmise that the reptilian beings are on both. If there's a simple divide between Annunaki and Draconian, there may be reptilian strands in both camps. Okay, it doesn't necessarily, and I think David Icke acknowledges that the reptilians themselves are at war with themselves.
Yeah, I think that's been acknowledged by him and Sitchin and some others, if I'm not mistaken. Now, you could bear in mind when I quote Sitchin, I read that book some 10 years ago. I mean, I read his whole Earth Chronicles, all the books. You know, you read something 10 years ago, and you read a bunch of other material between now and then. It's easy to, misunderstand. I mean, to confuse things. So sometimes I might say something, and it might be, I'm thinking of one author, but remembering what another author wrote, in other words.
Yeah, I know. And the issue is extremely complex, and there's many tangents you can take on it. And if we just stick to what's in this book, that's already too much. You know what I mean? I brought up Atlantis a few minutes ago, and I probably shouldn't have done that because I don't want to confuse the audience more than what is necessary.
Right.
Well, but the book is called The Final Deception, Hidden History, and the Rise of the Imposter Christ. Because actually the main thesis of the book, or at least my main central purpose of writing it, is not really to talk about extraterrestrials and aliens and invaders, or even about Moses and the ancient Israelites. My main purpose is to demonstrate that the gospel Jesus is a hardcore imposter, and I do mean by that there is a genuine Christ, and that the genuine Christ is not the subject of the New Testament or the other books, the non-canonical books that we have. He has been deleted from the historical record, deliberately and methodically, at great cost.
Is there any
that is my sentence.
Any material that people could look for to find anywhere at all that might explain a little bit more about the true Christ?
No, but that's a short answer. The only out of all the groups in the Middle East, the only group that are on record, and this is acknowledged by the Catholic Encyclopedia, the only group on record confirming what I'm saying are the Druze. Now, Druze beliefs, Druze theology is not written down, it's not published. Druze themselves are forbidden to discuss it with non-Druze on pain of death. And they do kill, even today, they still kill Druze who they think have let secrets out the bag. So this is a real mystery, and I'm sure if your listeners have heard of the Druze, I'm sure they have no idea what the Druze believe, because nobody really has.
Just to make sure there's no misunderstanding, are you referring to Druze or Druids?
Oh, Druze. The Druze of Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. It's a minority religion in the Middle East.
I think I've heard about them.
Oh, they came to fame about 30 years ago, where they were involved in the Lebanon Civil War. The Western public used to have a guy called Wally Jumblatt on their TV screens every night, being interviewed by Dan Rather and all the others. And he was the leader of the Druze militia.
If I remember correctly, what I read about him was in the Big Book of Reincarnation, and these and the Druze, they do believe in reincarnation, which is something the church stamped out centuries ago.
Yeah, that's one of the few things. Technically, they believe in the transmigration of the soul, which is not necessarily the same thing as reincarnation. Reincarnation, as it comes to us from Hinduism and the Buddhist offshoot, is a linear process, isn't it? It's a carrot and stick approach to life. Do good in this life, you get a good life next time. Do bad, you'll be punished in the next life. And it's a learning process. Step by step, you supposedly grow through a succession of births. And so time is understood as strictly linear, which is how it's experienced, of course. Transmigration of the soul is really steps out of the time construct and views the individual as having multiple incarnations, which are concurrent in different time zones. You understand the difference?
Yes, I do.
In other words, all time is actually now.
Right.
All time occurs simultaneously. So, according to the transmigration of the soul, you could be, for example, you might be alive during the Roman era and now, but you're living. It's actually at the same time. You know, if you look historically in the textbooks, you're in the historical period of Rome, and you're here. So it seems a linear process, but from outside, if you're looking at it, well, imagine you're looking at it off planet. It's all taking place at the same time. You know.
Right. Now, I've heard of that teaching before.
Well, it's not actually. Oxford scientists, one of the most famous scientists at Oxford, brought a book out. His name's Barber. He brought a book out a few years ago called The End of Time, where he attempts to prove, and many think that he did successfully prove, that there is really no such thing as time. That there's only the now moment. The moment that you are currently experiencing is all that there is. So time is just a succession of now moments. We happen to experience it as a linear process, the arrow of time going forward. But that's another matter. In reality, in quantum physics reality, which is the ultimate reality, there really is no such thing as time. That's a hard thing to get your head around. But transmigration of the soul, the way to differentiate that from reincarnation is that the soul has multiple incarnations that are concurrent. They're just taking place at different space-time locations on the matrix, so to speak.
So you could actually pop out of your existence here and pop into one in the past or the future, because all that's really now anyway.
Karma, so all karma that is instant, and karma, the different lives that you may be having, you affect the present moment. Each one is affecting what you're experiencing.
It sounds kind of complex.
Yeah. But I bring that up just to show that, just to make that important differential. The Druze are not really influenced by Hinduism. And that because this thing, what I've talked about, the transmigration of the soul, was the ancient Greeks believed that.
Okay.
That was an ancient Greek. But anyway, where were we?
Well, I was going to say, going back to your book, you was talking about the imposter Christ and the real versus the true Christ. can you help identify we know the church talks about the imposter Christ, but can we identify him as a person? Does he have a name, in other words? Or is it just a doctrine?
Yeah. No. I'm saying that the Galilean Jesus, Yeshua, would be his name, wouldn't it?
Okay, he would be the imposter Christ.
Right.
Okay.
And he is the subject matter of the Gospels and the letters of Paul. He is the subject matter of Christian doctrine and church theology. Now, according to the Druze, he existed, but he was a pupil of a student for a few years, supposedly, of Jesus Christ, the real Christ. And he rebelled and left. There was a separation of the ways. And the story, the real Jesus Christ was an Essene. This is what the Druze say. The real Jesus Christ was an Essene. And that he did not die. He simply ascended or passed through a stargate or just simply got out of here. This is what the Druze say. Now, as far as the Galilean Jesus is concerned, the Druze don't really have much to say about him. But there's no historical documents explaining the life of somebody called Jesus Christ, other than the New Testament, right?
Yep.
If that's what you mean by historical document. But what I'm suggesting is that the reason for that is because every single trace of him was destroyed. That is what the book burning, the whole witch hunt, book burning, persecution of heretics, that whole thing has been about.
Was to get him out of the history.
That's what motivated all the book burning. That's what motivated everything. And that was in part what motivated the persecution of the Cathars. Because the only, a lot of people think it's a legend, but the Cathars are reputed to have possessed books, handwritten, or papyrus works, handwritten by the original Christ, the real Christ, or the genuine Christ.
If that's true, then
this was a treasure, the so-called Cathar treasure that they escaped with before they were annihilated.
If that's true, then these books might still be buried somewhere or still might come to surface.
Well, exactly.
But is there any clue where they went with the books? We know that they were largely killed out by the Catholic Church, but surely a remnant, escaped underground or something. Are there any clues of them being out anywhere else? Any trace of them?
No, the only people just guess that they're in the Pyrenees somewhere.
Pyrenees, that sounds familiar.
Well, that's because Montsegur and the Cathars were located in that area. But, they may or may not be in the Pyrenees. They may have been taken out.
Well, I spot everything's possible.
Everybody's been looking. Even the Nazis were around there looking. Himmler sent a team to Montsegur, and they were scouring the caves, network of caves in the area for 5 or 6 years.
Okay, well,
that's documented.
There was something we missed earlier I'd kind of like to go back to. We kind of moved along rather quickly. But
Royce.
You mentioned that.
Saying,
go ahead.
Go on then.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, we're talking about an historical mention or record of the genuine Christ. If you remember in my book, I'm saying that the genuine Christ is referred to in Matthew's Gospel in the first chapter, which is a totally different birth to Luke and a totally different set of ancestors to Luke. And to this day, no biblical scholars have been able to explain why these two Gospels have totally different set of ancestors for the same birth.
Yeah, I remember reading that in your book, and I remember that in all honesty, this controversy has actually come up in churches before too, that the Luke's gospel was different than, genealogy was different than Matthew's. And some people credit it to the fact that Luke was actually writing it from Mary's, his mother's genealogy, but that doesn't make a lot of sense to me either.
No, ancient genealogies, particularly in the Middle East, were absolutely never on the maternal line.
That's why it don't make sense.
The world's most fanatically patriarchal culture that we know about. And they would not have maternal lineages. So that's absurd.
That does sound absurd. So what you're basically getting at, if I understand correctly, was Luke's genealogy was probably the false one, while Matthew's was the correct one.
Well, I'm saying both genealogies are theologically motivated, and you can't take them as historical documents.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Luke goes back to Adam, which that's ridiculous, and Matthew goes back to Abraham, which is equally ridiculous, and nobody would have ever believed that kind of genealogy anyway. So they're both, theologically inspired, but there are elements of truth in them, and particularly both have different grandfathers of the child, when the grandfather would be presumably in living memory. So the simplest way to explain this is that both ancestral lists are different because they belong to different people, right?
But neither one of them belong to the real Christ.
No. One is the real. One is Matthew and Luke are both telling the story, the biography of the impostor Christ. Matthew is using details and information from the genuine Christ.
Okay.
In his opening chapter. Luke is not doing that. Luke has devised his own genealogy. It's quite distinct from he rejects Matthew's. Maybe he didn't even know about Matthew's. It doesn't really matter. He's not concerned with Matthew's genealogy. He's got his own, which deliberately designed to show that the child is the rightful Hyksos, if you like, Hyksos Messiah. What I mean by that is, Hyksos texts, such as which I've mentioned, like the book of Enoch, for example, predict the coming of the Son of Man, or the elect one. The elect one is a term that occurs in Luke and nowhere else in the entire pantheon of Christian literature, just Luke. And that comes from Enoch. And Enoch said that the Son of Man, the elect one, comes the 77th generation from Adam, and that is why Luke has 77 names in his genealogy. So it's pretty clear that what Luke's trying to do,
trying to authenticate his by reading of Enoch.
Yeah, my Jesus, that's the real thing. So I'm not saying that the Galilean Jesus didn't exist, and I'm not saying that he's a phony. I'm saying he's not the Christ. He came. I come from the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Right? Do not go to the Gentiles. I have come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He's a Hyksos Messiah figure that is only interested in Hyksos Israelites and the broader Hyksos diaspora, of course. And he never went around saying, I am the Christ.
Well, I know that in Matthew he's referred to as the Christ, but that's the only book that refers to him that way.
Well, he asks the disciples, who do men say that I am? And they usually start off by saying, well, they say you're John the Baptist. And that's another issue, right? And then they end up saying, I think that Peter says you're the Christ, right? But in Mark's gospel, and also in some of the other gospels, Jesus is at great pains to say, don't tell people who I am. So the church traditionally interprets that as, don't tell people I am the Christ, right? I'm turning that on its head and saying, don't tell people I'm, basically, if you read my book, I don't want to spill the beans on this one because it's a bit heavy. But I do say who he may be, who I believe he is, what he is, right?
Yeah, I mean, let's not go into that.
Quite a lot of flack. I've had quite a lot of flack on this, and I wouldn't want you to get any more trouble than you need to. But I do make it clear in the book who I consider the Galilean Jesus to be, and it is not the Christ, but rather a usurper, a convenient usurper of that role. Now, personally, he wasn't going around, he wasn't going around saying, I am the Christ, I am the Christ, because that wasn't really his interest. He was the Hyksos Messiah figure, the Hyksos hero, who came to be king, which is hard to dispute, seeing as he went into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey, copying the scene from the Old Testament, and everybody's hailing the king. That didn't go down too well, of course, and so they wanted to kill him. And as I explained in the book, he wasn't killed at all. He wasn't even on the cross. Somebody else was.
Which there's other people that will attest to the same. In fact, the Gnostics say he wasn't even on the cross; that somebody else was.
Yeah, they actually say that he laughed. He was laughing.
Right.
Laughing as his former persecutors nailed his impostor. So actually the guy on the cross was an impostor of the impostor Christ. So in that sense, there are three Christ figures in the New Testament.
There was more than that walking around Jerusalem, period, as a whole. I mean, back then, a lot of people thought that they were the Christ.
I'm just talking about the Gospels.
Right. All righty.
So there are critics of the Gospels. It's quite common for them to say, Jesus is a composite figure. He's lifted from various pre-existing mythologies, etc., etc., and it didn't really exist. Well, I'm saying that's half true. He's a composite character in the sense of he's a mix of three historical people, one of which was the historical Jesus Christ, and he only gets a brief mention in Matthew's Gospel, which is with the story of the Magi, and then the guy who's at the Passion, the so-called Passion of the Christ, which is the last few chapters of every single Gospel. That isn't Jesus at all. That's why this talkative, this guy who never shuts up, who's never short of a glib one-liner, suddenly has nothing to say to Pilate or to Herod or to anyone, in fact. There's a complete character transformation takes place. And because it's not him. And I take it a step further, because not only did this willing substitute take his place, he wasn't crucified. In fact, that was the only way he would take his place.
That leads you to ask, in the end, who was crucified?
Well, none of them. Of these three figures, none were crucified. You see, the crucifixion took place on private land owned by Joseph of Arimathea. It didn't take place on government land. This took place on private land. So the idea of thronging crowds at the foot of the cross is nonsense. And in Mark's Gospel, it explains even the women that associated with Jesus, such as Mary Magdalene, had to watch from afar. The only people at the foot of the cross were the Roman soldiers and Hyksos leadership, such as Joseph of Arimathea and his cult.
Okay, now, where are you getting the information that this is where he was crucified at, or where the crucifixion took place?
That's in the New Testament. The place where he was crucified
was Golgotha.
Yeah, it's you'd have to look it up. It's all referenced there, Reese. It's all referenced.
I must have missed it the first time I went through it. But yeah, I can go back and look it back up. Just kind of caught my interest for a quick minute there. Now, listen, I was going to tell you, we got about less than 12 minutes left. Is there anything you wanted to say that we didn't get a chance to talk about yet?
Well, we didn't really talk about the mysterious parentage of the Galilean Jesus.
Okay, why don't we get that out there real quick?
Which is, this cover up is, a lot of it is dependent on the virgin birth concept, which has been around so long now, it's just taken for granted. And most Protestants just think that Joseph was probably the father, and the church kind of created the virgin birth, just borrowed it from Greek mythology, just to enhance Jesus' status, but it really wasn't necessary. Right? That's kind of what most Protestants would think. Of course, a lot of Protestants believe in the virgin birth as well. But in the book, and lots of people have criticized, and very, very effectively, the virgin birth doctrine, and explained where it comes from, and that it's not a Jewish concept at all. It's impossible in Judaism, and etc., etc., and that it's not actually advocated in the Bible anyway. It's just an expedient interpretation of it. What I do is, whereas I agree with that, in the book, I specifically state that the father, the biological father of Jesus, his identity was covered up because he was John the Baptist.
Whoa.
And Luke creates this scenario that John was only 6 months older than Jesus, although John does admit that they were related. He doesn't specify the nature of the relationship, but he insists that John was 6 months older. The problem with this is that Luke is already a proven liar from the story of Jesus' birth. You know, when Luke pretends it took place during a census, a Roman census. And there was no such Roman census in Judea at that time. I'll go into that in the book. It's Luke's contrived way of explaining how it came to be that Joseph and Mary, who are supposedly Galilean, how they came to be in Bethlehem. And he makes up this elaborate concoction to prove that. So my point here is that when Jesus goes public, John the Baptist has already been around a long time, and he's already established his reputation. In fact, Luke actually says that all, not just some, all the people of Judea have been baptized by John. Of course, that's an exaggeration. But the point is that John's been around a long time. He's garnered a lot of respect. Even Herod supposedly feared John. So, John's been around a long time. So he's at least a generation older than Jesus. But the key to this issue isn't just that everyone would confuse Jesus with John all the time. And that was happening all the time throughout the Bible. But the key issue is that when John dies, John's disciples immediately report his death to Jesus. And Jesus begins a period of mourning. Now, in Jewish tradition, it's still the case today, the period of mourning is known as the Shiva. And the only participants in the Shiva, which is supposed to last for 7 days, are immediate family. And that is the parents and the siblings only. Not cousins, not friends, not aunts and uncles. And after a death, the immediate next of kin must be notified as soon as possible. This is the first one. And on the paternal side. So if the son dies, the father's told. If the father's died, the son is told. And Matthew and Mark's gospel explain in great detail how John the Baptist's disciples, who did not get along with Jesus and his disciples, and that's well attested in the other gospels. They were always fighting about issues of lifestyle, and on one occasion Jesus sent them packing with a condemnation of John. So they, John's dead. They go straight to Jesus to report it. Jesus takes his disciples and they get on a boat and they go off to mourn John's passing. So what I'm saying in the book, that this is the Shiva. So what does that make John? John must be either Jesus' son or Jesus' father. Why does everyone think that Jesus is the return of John? People think that when John's dead, and even Herod is quoted as saying, "This is Jesus." Why does everyone mix the two all the time?
As I say, when the Pharisees asked John if he was the Christ. Yeah,
but
I can tell we're being rushed out of here for the next host to come on. Real quick, like everybody, come join me this Saturday at www.talknowradio.net, and I'll be interviewing Geraldine Palmer-Baus. And actually, she's also volunteered to do free readings if anybody's interested. And don't forget, you can go to markgibbs.net, www.markgibbs.net, and learn more about his book, and you can even purchase it through that link. And if you go to my website, I have it linked automatically to his site. So folks, we'll wait to see y'all next Thursday. In the meantime, I hope I see you this Saturday. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all! See how the trouble you've started?
Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener support